My name is Ethan. I'm 32. Until 2 months ago, I was just the guy who maintained rich people's estates, fixed their lights, raked their gravel, stayed invisible. Then one night I was standing in a hallway at 10 o'clock, and a woman in a cream robe looked at me from the other end of that corridor and said, "Don't look at me like that." Except I hadn't been looking. Not yet. She smelled like jasmine and something quieter underneath it. And the way she said my name the next morning like she'd always known it, that was the moment I knew I was in trouble. She was 44, married to a man who owned everything around me. And she told me one night in a hidden garden that nobody else knew existed. I chose you, not him. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments. Because I still don't know if what we did was wrong. I wasn't supposed to notice her. That was the first rule of a job like mine, even if nobody ever said it out loud. Keep your head down. Fix what's broken. Don't make eye contact with a woman of the house unless she speaks to you first. And even then, answer short, answer clean, and walk away before the silence has a chance to turn into something else. I've been doing this kind of work since I was 22. Grounds maintenance, general repairs, property caretaking, nothing glamorous. But it paid steadily, kept me outdoors, and gave me the kind of quiet I needed after a life that had been a little too loud for a while. I was 32 by the time I came to the Whitmore estate, old enough to know better. The estate sat on a stretch of coastal land about 40 minutes outside the city. Private road, iron gate, 3 acres of landscaped grounds rolling down toward a rocky bluff above the ocean. The main house was white stone, 3 stories, with tall windows that looked like they were always watching you from outside. The guest house near the east garden was mine, small, clean, with a narrow kitchen window that faced the sea. The first night I lay in the dark listening to the ocean and thought, this is the kind of place people build when they want to feel untouchable. My name is Ethan Cole, and I want to tell you what happened. All of it because I've been carrying it long enough. The first time she spoke to me, I was fixing a hallway light. Late, maybe 10 o'clock. I was up on the stepladder, one hand inside the fixture, when I heard her footsteps. Soft-soled slippers. The kind of movement that comes from living in big, empty houses long enough to stop announcing yourself. I didn't look. That was the rule. Then she said it. "Don't look at me like that." Her voice was low, calm, not unkind. I turned. She stood 12 feet away at the end of the corridor, wearing a cream robe, dark hair loose around her shoulders. She wasn't young in the way that's easy to describe. Beautiful in the way that takes time, lines at the corners of her eyes, cheekbones that had sharpened with years, a stillness to her posture that came from a lifetime of knowing exactly how she appeared to other people. Clara Whitmore, watching me like something she hadn't decided about yet. The thing was I hadn't been looking at her, not the way she meant. I'd just turned to see who was there, but I didn't say that. I said, "Sorry, ma'am." She held my gaze one beat too long. Then something shifted behind her eyes, and she nodded once and walked away. By the time I climbed back down, I was looking, not at her, she'd already gone, but at the empty corridor, at the place she'd been standing. What was that? I had no answer. Marcus Holly ran the estate. 38, broad-shouldered, efficient in the way that comes from spending years earning the trust of powerful people and not intending to lose it. He met me the next morning with a clipboard and a look that said he was already taking my measure. He walked me through everything. The grounds, the staff, the schedule, the hierarchies. My job existed mostly outside grounds. Repairs, maintenance, close enough to the house to be useful, far enough to be invisible. At the end of the walkthrough, almost offhand, he said, "Mrs. Whitmore notices everything." He didn't look at me when he said it. "Understood," I said, but the words sat with me all morning. She came to find me in the garden around 11. I was kneeling in the east bed when the gravel shifted behind me. I stood and turned. Linen trousers, loose white shirt, hair pulled back, different in daylight, softer, but no less composed. "You fixed the light?" she said. "Yes, ma'am." I wasn't complaining. A pause. "I'm thanking you." She looked past me at the garden bed. "You're doing it differently than the last man. Is that a problem?" "No, it's actually better." She should have turned and left then. That would have been normal. But she stayed. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" she asked. "About 10 years?" She nodded slowly, like fitting a piece into something. Then she said my name. "Thank you, Ethan." Calm certé, not reading it off a list. Just my name, in her voice, like it belonged there. She'd never been told my name, not in front of me. She turned and walked back toward the house, and I stood in the garden thinking about that one small thing. She knew my name, and she'd said it first. That night, the kitchen was empty except for Clara. I came in through the back door to return a key, and found her standing at the counter in the half-dark, one lamp on, holding a glass of water and looking at the window that faced the garden. Like she'd been standing there a while. "I can't sleep," she said, before I could apologize for disturbing her. Simple, no explanation. Like it was an old fact she'd stopped trying to fix. I hung the key. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. I stayed a moment. I still don't fully know why. Is it always quiet in the guest house? She asked. Pretty much. I don't mind quiet. She turned slightly. Neither do I, most of the time. She reached up for a second glass, unhurried, and poured water into it from the same pitcher, slid it across the marble toward me. Not wine, nothing that would mean something, just water. Just that. I reached for it. And while I did, my fingers brushed the back of her hand. Neither of us moved. Maybe 2 seconds. Maybe less. Then she lifted her hand and wrapped it around her own glass. I picked up mine. We stood in the dim kitchen, not looking at each other. Ice shifting quietly in our glasses. The ocean humming low beyond the windows. Good night, Ethan, she said. Good night, Mrs. Whitmore. I went back to the guest house and lay in the dark for a long time. The next morning I couldn't stop replaying it. I told myself it was nothing. A brush of fingers. 2 people in a kitchen. But I couldn't make myself believe that. And the trying was starting to cost me something. Marcus found me adjusting the irrigation timer just before 9. He stood beside me watching the sprinklers, and when he spoke, his voice was measured and careful. People in these houses, he said, have routines, habits. It's easy to get too comfortable, too fast, to mistake familiarity for something else. He looked at me. I've seen it happen. Doesn't end well, for anyone. I hear you, Marcus. He nodded and walked away. And that's when something quiet shifted in my mind. A thought I'd been keeping at the edge without quite looking at it. I thought about my hiring. The agency? The phrasing. Personal recommendation? The estate requested someone with your particular background? I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but standing there in the field with Marcus's warning still in the air, I wondered, who exactly had made that request? Who had looked at my file and said, this one? Not Marcus? Not Daniel? Clara? The certainty settled into my chest. Warm, strange, slightly wrong. Like finding a door unlocked that should have been locked. Like realizing the path you thought you wandered onto had been laid out for you all along. That evening it rained. Soft coastal rain that blurs the edges of everything. I was reading in the guest house when I heard the knock. Clara stood on the narrow porch, jacket held loosely over her shoulders, light rain settling into her hair. I thought you might want to know, she said. The east garden light is flickering again. I looked at her. We both knew that wasn't why she was here. She stayed anyway. I'll take a look in the morning, I said. Of course. She looked out at the dark grounds. But Jasmine was sharper in the wet air. You make this place feel different, she said. Quiet, like she'd been arguing with herself about whether to say it, and had finally stopped. It wasn't flattery. It wasn't flirting. It was just the truth, from someone who had gotten very used to not saying plain truths. I didn't answer. There wasn't a safe answer. She pulled the jacket tighter and turned to go. Good night, Ethan. She didn't wait for me to say it back. I stood in the doorway after she was gone and watched the path she'd walked disappear into the rain. And I understood something then with the kind of clarity that arrives slowly even when you already knew. This was no longer neutral. It hadn't been neutral since the hallway. Maybe it had never been neutral at all. Then the next several days settled into a pattern. A careful one. One we were both pretending not to notice. I worked. Marcus gave me more responsibility. The indoor staff nodded at me in the hallways. Everything looked exactly like it was supposed to. But beneath the routine, something else was running. Parallel. Quieter. The way that people start to time things without meaning to, or maybe meaning to and not admitting it. I'd finish at the east side of the property just as she came back from her walk. She'd be in the kitchen when I came in to return a tool. Small things. Then one afternoon I noticed the side door of the main house sitting slightly ajar. Not wide open, just an inch. A door with a latch I'd adjusted myself 3 days ago. A latch that never stuck open. I stood in the garden and looked at it. Then I went back to the guest house and changed my shirt and told myself I was reading too much into a door. But I thought about it until evening. And when evening came, I went. She was in the small sitting room at the back of the house, curled in the corner of a deep gray sofa with a book open in her lap and a lamp throwing warm light across the room. Bare feet, hair down. And for the first time since I'd arrived, she looked like herself. Not Mrs. Whitmore. Not the woman of the house. Just a woman, in a quiet room, on a quiet evening. She looked up when I came to the doorway. She didn't look surprised. You found it? She said. I almost didn't come. I know. She closed the book. Sit down, Ethan. I sat across the room, not close. The lamp made the space feel like its own world, cut off from everything outside it. The ocean barely audible through the glass. We talked, just talked. She asked about my work, my life before this, and I answered in the way I hadn't answered anyone in a long time, honestly, without trimming it down to what seemed appropriate. I asked her things too. Carefully, she answered. She told me she'd married Daniel at 26, that her life was very full in the ways that could be measured and very empty in the ways that couldn't. She said it the way you describe weather, a fact you've made peace with, more or less. Do you miss it? I asked. A smaller life. She thought about that. I miss feeling like someone was actually in the room with me, she said. The silence after that wasn't empty. It was full. That was the part that stayed with me. Not what she said, but what the silence between us had started to feel like. Something with weight. Something that mattered. I left before it got too late. Said goodnight. Walked back through the dark house and out the side door, the latch clicking softly behind me, gravel cold under my shoes. Jasmine sharp in the night air. And I thought, we're both pretending this is innocent. We both know it isn't. And neither of us has stopped. The days after that felt like walking a line I couldn't see but could feel under my feet. Everything looked normal from the outside. I worked. Marcus gave me his morning briefings. The indoor staff moved through their routines. Daniel left early and came back late, the sound of his car on the gravel marking the beginning and end of each day like a clock. Clara appeared at her usual times, composed and unhurried. And when our paths crossed, she was polite, the way she was polite to everyone. But something had shifted. We both knew it. And knowing it, without saying it, became its own kind of intimacy. The glances lasted a half-second too long. When we passed each other near the house, the distance between us felt measured, like we were both aware of exactly how close we were, and had silently agreed not to get closer. Small things, the kind of things no one else would notice. But I noticed. And she knew I noticed. That was the dangerous part. The hidden room came on a Tuesday night. I know that because I'd spent the afternoon replacing boards on the east garden fence. And Tuesdays were when the indoor staff had their half-day, which meant the main house went quieter than usual by 5. I'd finished late, cleaned up my tools, and was heading back toward the guest house when I saw Clara coming from a part of the grounds I hadn't been to yet. The far corner of the east garden, past the old stone wall, where the property pressed up against a dense row of cypress trees. I hadn't had a reason to work back there. The grounds map didn't list anything significant. She saw me see her. She stopped, considered something, then said, quietly, "Come here." I followed her through a narrow gap in the stone wall I hadn't noticed before, along a short path between the cypresses, and then through a low wooden door set into the far side of the wall. On the other side was a garden room, small, maybe 20 feet across. Surrounded entirely by old stone walls thick with climbing vines, a few iron chairs around a low table, lanterns hanging from hooks, a wooden bench along the far wall. The sky was open above it, the last of the evening light still holding. It smelled like cut grass and old stone and something faintly floral I couldn't name. "I've had this for 3 years," she said. "No one else on the staff knows about it." She said it simply, but the weight of it arrived slowly. 3 years of keeping something only to herself, in a house full of people, and now she was showing it to me. Why, I asked. Same question I'd asked before, same careful way of asking it. She looked around the small space, like she was seeing it through someone else's eyes for the first time. Because it's the only place on this property that doesn't feel like it belongs to anyone but me. She sat on the wooden bench. I sat beside her, not close, but the bench wasn't wide, and in that enclosed space, even the distance felt like proximity. We talked until the light was almost gone, about nothing important, about everything that mattered. The ocean was barely audible from inside those walls, just a suggestion of sound. She had a small lantern she lit when it got dark enough, and the flame made the old stone walls flicker and warm. At some point I realized my shoulder was almost touching hers. Neither of us moved away. The morning after felt like a reckoning. I was up before 6, standing at the guest house window with my coffee going cold in my hand, watching the light come up over the sea. I wasn't at peace with what was happening. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't swept up in something I didn't understand. I understood it exactly. I was a single man with no complications of my own, and she was a married woman in a house I was paid to maintain. And the distance that should have existed between us was dissolving in small increments every time we let it. I knew all of that, and I kept showing up anyway. Marcus noticed something was different that morning. He didn't say anything specific. He wasn't that kind of man. But he watched me a beat longer than usual during the morning briefing, and when he handed me the day's work order, he held it for a half-second before releasing it. Like a question mark he'd decided not to voice. I took the list and went to work. Lily came back that afternoon. I saw her car on my way past the front drive and felt something tighten slightly in my chest. I didn't fully understand the reaction at first. Then I watched, from across the garden, as Lily and Clara walked the back terrace together, and I understood. Clara was different with Lily than she was alone. More careful, more contained. The small softnesses that had been showing in her, the quiet openness, the way she'd started to move through the estate with slightly less armor, all of it went back on when Lily was there, which meant Lily was someone who looked closely. Someone who noticed. After about an hour, Lily came outside alone. She walked the garden path slowly, the way someone does when they're pretending to be on a stroll but are actually thinking hard about something else. She reached the section where I was trimming the hedgerow and stopped. "How are you settling in?" she asked. Well, thank you. Claire says you're good at the work. A pause. She talks about the estate more than she used to. She'll let that sit there. Not accusatory. Just laid down. The way you place something on a table to see what reaction it gets? It's a good property, I said. Lily looked at me. Her eyes were the kind that recorded things. Yes, she said. It is. She walked back toward the house. I stood in the hedgerow for a long moment after, the clippers in my hand. The afternoon gone very quiet around me. That night, Clara was cold. Not cruel. Just gone. Like a switch had been thrown. She passed me near the side entrance without stopping, gave me the polite nod she gave everyone, and kept walking. Nothing in her eyes that acknowledged the garden room, or the bench, or any evening, in the past 2 weeks. I told myself it was Lily, as something in that afternoon visit had recalibrated her, reminded her of the borders, made her pull back. I understood it. I did. But standing in the side corridor after she'd passed, I noticed the absence of her, the way you notice a sound that suddenly stopped. The quiet isn't the same quiet it was before. The garden room. 3 nights later, I went back on my own. I didn't plan it. I was doing a late perimeter check, and my feet just took me to the gap in the stone wall without consulting the rest of me. I pushed through the low door and stood in the small enclosed space in the dark. The iron chairs. The bench. The lantern on its hook, unlit. And on the bench, folded carefully, her scarf. Dark fabric, soft, the kind of thing that costs money but doesn't announce it. I picked it up. It smelled like jasmine perfume. I stood there in the dark holding it, and I couldn't tell if it had been forgotten or left. The difference mattered. I turned it over in my hands for a long time, and I still couldn't tell. I put it back exactly where I'd found it and walked back to the guest house alone. 2 nights after that, my phone lit up at 2:03 in the morning. I was awake. I'd been sleeping badly all week, lying in the dark, listening to the ocean. The screen glowed on the nightstand. No name, just a number I recognized. Back door, just once more. 5 words, that was all. I lay there and looked at the ceiling. The ocean did its slow, indifferent thing outside. The house was dark, the whole estate was dark, just once more. I knew what that meant. She knew I knew. That was the reason for the phrasing, the acknowledgement, like right there inside it, that this was something that couldn't keep going. One more time, then a clean stop. That was the offer. I also knew that people who said just once more almost never meant it. Not because they were dishonest. Because the once more doesn't fix whatever it was supposed to fix. It just moves the line. I lay there for 7 minutes. I watched the ceiling. Then I got up, put on my shoes, and walked out into the dark. The grounds were silent in a way that had texture. Gravel under my feet, each step too loud. The ocean hum constant and low. The main house was dark except for one window on the 2nd floor, a bathroom maybe, or a hallway light left on, casting a thin pale rectangle on the lawn below. My breath was steady. That surprised me. I came around to the back of the house. The back door was dark, closed. I raised my hand to knock. The door opened before I touched it. She was standing in the doorway in the dim light, and she looked different. The composure she always carried was still there, but thinner, like something worn at the edges by weeks of holding. Her hair was down. She was wearing a dark shirt, and she looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Not quite afraid, not quite certain, somewhere between the two. I stepped inside. The kitchen was dark except for the faint light from the hallway beyond. The whole house felt held still. She closed the door behind me, soft as a breath. We stood there in the kitchen, closer than we'd ever stood, and neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then she said, "I know this is wrong." "I know," I said. "I've been trying to stop, so have I." She looked at me, really looked, the way she had in the hallway that first night, but without the control, without the armor, and then she said, quietly, in the way someone says a thing they've been holding back for too long, "I chose you, not him." The words landed the way a stone lands in still water. They didn't make a dramatic sound. They just sent ripples in every direction that wouldn't stop. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I had words for what those words did. She reached up, and her fingers found my jaw, and I let them, and the space between us closed the way it had been trying to close for weeks. Not rushed, not frantic, with the terrible tenderness of two people who know they're making a mistake and have decided to make it anyway. That was when the sound came. Footsteps, upstairs. Not hurried, just the normal movement of someone who'd woken and was crossing a room. But in that silent house they were enormous. Then the lights. Down the hall, a lamp came on. Its glow reached the kitchen and a thin bar under the door. We separated. 1 step back, both of us, simultaneous. The kitchen was dark between us again. She was looking at the door. I was looking at her face, calm already, or the surface of calm, the way she could put that on in an instant. A door opened somewhere above us. Footsteps on the stairs. She looked at me once, fast, clear, and I moved, through the kitchen, out the back door, into the dark. The door closed behind me with barely a sound. I was across the garden before the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. I didn't run. I walked. Steady, measured, through the dark and the jasmine-scented air, my heart loud and my breathing quiet, and I didn't look back. The next morning came anyway. That's the thing nobody tells you about nights like that. Morning comes exactly the same way it always does. The light, the birds, the smell of the sea. The world doesn't pause for what happened in the dark. It just continues. I was at the East Garden by 6:30. Tools in hand, normal work. I kept my eyes on the soil and the plants and the ordinary tasks that needed doing, and I told myself that this was still manageable, that nothing had technically happened, that the distance from last night to this morning was enough to work with. Then Clara came outside. She crossed the garden, toward the main terrace, and as she passed, maybe 20 feet from where I was kneeling, she glanced at me. Not the polite nod, not the composed distance of the past few days. She looked at me the way you look at someone who knows something about you that no one else does, soft, and a little bit sad, and then she looked away and kept walking. I watched her go. Daniel appeared on the terrace a few minutes later. He stood with his morning coffee, looking out at the water, unhurried. Same posture as always, same quiet authority. He didn't look toward me. Whatever had happened in the night, the footsteps, the lamp, the door, it had either been too small to register, or he had decided not to register it. I couldn't tell which, maybe both. I went back to work. The morning moved the way mornings do. Slow at first, then suddenly gone. By noon it felt like any other day on the estate. Marcus gave me an afternoon assignment. I did it. The indoor staff went about their routine. The ocean kept its steady sound beneath everything, and Clara moved through her day with the calm she always carried. But once, in the afternoon, she stood at the upstairs window for a long time, looking down at the grounds. At nothing in particular, at everything. The weeks after were quiet. Not empty, there was still work, still routine, still the daily machinery of the estate turning as it always had. But the charged quality that had been building, all those weeks, that almost unbearable closeness, had settled into something different. Not gone, not resolved, just changed shape. Clara and I didn't meet alone again. Not in the garden room, not in the kitchen at night, not anywhere that was just the two of us in the dark. I don't know if it was a decision she made or something that simply happened by mutual unspoken agreement. Probably both. But she was still there, and so was I. And sometimes, in the late afternoon, when the light hit the grounds, in that particular coastal way, warm and low in gold, I'd catch her looking at me from across the garden, not with longing exactly, with something older than that, something that had settled in. I knew the feeling. We'd made a mistake. Or we'd done a true thing, depending on which angle you stood at. Probably both at once, which is the hardest kind to carry. Lily came back once more, about a month later. She was quieter that visit. She still watched me, but the watchfulness had changed. Less assessment, more recognition. Like she had arrived at a conclusion she hadn't decided what to do with. She didn't say anything to me directly. But on her way out, she paused beside her car and looked back at the house, and then at me, and something in her expression said, "I see it, and I've decided it's not mine to say." I gave her a small nod. She got in her car and drove away. My contract ran another 4 months after that night. I stayed. Not sure I could have explained why, if someone had pressed me. The work was good. The property was honest in the way old coastal places are, weather-worn and real under all the money and the marble. And maybe I stayed because leaving felt like a larger admission than staying did. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to not see her anymore. The last morning was ordinary. Marcus shook my hand. The indoor staff said their version of goodbye. I loaded my things into the truck, checked the guest house one last time, the narrow kitchen window facing the sea, the white walls, the silence I had lived inside for 7 months. I drove out through the iron gate, the keypad, the private road. I didn't look back. That was the decision I'd made. But 3 nights later, at just past 10, my phone lit up. Not a message, just a picture. The garden, nighttime. A lantern lit in the hidden room, warm orange light leaking through the low wooden door in the stone wall. Nothing else. I've looked at it for a long time. I still have it. Some nights I think about the hallway. The cream robe, the loose dark hair, her voice in the quiet. "Don't look at me like that." The beginning of it, or what I thought was the beginning, though maybe it started before I arrived, back when she was looking at files and choosing a name. Some nights I think about the bench in the garden room, our shoulders almost touching in the dark, the lantern flame moving against the old stone walls. Some nights I think about her voice saying, "I chose you, not him," and how those 5 words changed the air in the room, and how I could feel them in my chest for weeks, after like a bruise that wasn't quite pain. I don't know what her life looks like now. I don't know if anything changed, or if it all resumed exactly as it was. Daniel's car on the gravel at the same hour, Marcus's clipboard, the staff and their routines, the estate continuing its quiet performance of itself. I hope she goes to the garden room. I hope she sits on the bench in the evening when the light is low and the walls are warm and she has that one place that's entirely hers. I hope she's less alone than she was. The porch light? That's the last thing I think about. On the nights I let myself think about it, the way it came on sometimes when I was walking back from the main house, casting that small square of yellow light on the dark path, I never knew. The whole time I was there, if it was on a timer, or if someone turned it on deliberately. I still don't know. And maybe that's the truest thing about all of it, that I was never entirely sure what was intentional and what was just the house. What she meant and what I needed to believe she meant. What was real, connection, and what was loneliness wearing its most convincing disguise. Some questions don't get answered. They just get quieter over time. Some nights the porch light still comes on, and I never know if it's for me or just a habit she couldn't break. Some choices don't end. They just learn how to hide.